There's a crowded field of candidates who want to be Michigan's next governor. But first, these Republicans and Democrats will have to square off among themselves in the August primary before two of them can advance to the next political contest. Today on Spotlight, discover why West Michigan Dr. Tom George believes he's the best person for the job. And later on Spotlight, Vince Kountz of the Detroit Regional Census tells us why their door-to-door campaign is crucial for Detroit. It's Sunday, July the 4th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight on the News. The race for Michigan governor. Senator, thank you for coming in. It's a pleasure having you.
Good morning, Chuck.
You're an anesthesiologist from Kalamazoo. If you think of the state of Michigan as a patient that needs fixing, how would you cure this patient? How would you create jobs, make the state healthy again?
It's time to turn off the anesthesia and wake up, Michigan.
How do you do that?
Well, we have some major work ahead of us. As you know, the economy in Michigan is broken. And if you look at the state budget, we're in trouble. We're going to lose federal stimulus money. We face what is now a $2 billion shortfall. So simply balancing the books is going to be a great challenge. But if you look at the big picture, Chuck, the single biggest expense of state government has become health care. And having a physician governor...
It's about a fourth of the general fund budget.
It is a fourth or more. If you look at Medicaid and then programs for state employees or other public employees, health programs, it exceeds the amount we spend on education. And if you want to remain solvent, if you want to free up resources to do other things, we have to tackle exploding health care costs.
And how do you do that? I mean, that's one of those areas in which we talk about it, but you can't actually go in and force patients to make themselves healthier, can you?
Well, there are things we can do. You know, private companies are doing that now. They're saying, we'll help you, we'll give you health care, but you got to do some things. It has to be a partnership. It turns out that half of health care cost or more link to the patient's behavior. And with these state programs, Medicaid and programs for state employees, we give people a credit card for their care, but we don't ask them to help. And as long as we don't do that, we're just going to keep spending more money. So we've built up a great system. You have beautiful hospitals here in southeast Michigan. In my area, we have hospitals where every room's a private room. We have color TV, valet parking. But it doesn't work to make Michigan healthier because we've failed to change behavior. So the programs need to be redesigned to say, we'll help you. You know, we will help you with care, but you have to be a participant. You have to help also.
You have also said on the campaign trail that you would make sure that people pay more into the health care coverage that they get, and particularly Medicaid?
Well, remember, Medicaid is for the poor and the disabled. Right. That's what it was originally intended for. Unfortunately, the federal health measure is to take Medicaid and make us expand it to another maybe 500,000 people in Michigan. We're broke. We can't afford to do that. So if we're going to continue covering the people we're covering, not just add more people, we have to ask them to do more. It's not just paying in more, co-pays and premiums, and for the poor and the disabled, they can't afford very much in that regard, but nominal ones are allowed under the federal program. It's a partnership with the federal government. We are allowed to add nominal co-pays and premiums. We should do that. They should have a buy-in. But it's more than that. It is also changing behavior. Businesses say to their employees, you know, you got to have a health screening next week. Oh, you got high blood pressure. Well, you better complete a class and learn how to get it under control. We don't do that with Medicaid recipients or with state employees. That's what's missing.
All right. So if you get all your wishes in terms of health care, you still have a whole lot more money that you got to make up in order to balance the budget and make the state healthy again. How do you do that? You've been on the campaign trail. How do you differ from your opponents? Because you have leveled some charges against them saying that they are promising too much. They're asking for cuts that they will not be able to deliver. How so?
All four of my opponents' plans revolve around massive tax cuts. Now, I'm a good Republican. I like reducing taxes, but the reality is we have a $2 billion shortfall for next year's budget. That means we're going to be insolvent unless we can cut spending $2 billion, and their tax cut plans call for another $2 billion in cuts if you're going to afford that. Now we're up to $4 billion. And their plans also call for more spending, so they don't add up. And to get that $4 billion in cuts, you could close all Michigan's universities, and you still wouldn't be there. You could close all our prisons. You still wouldn't be there. So their plans don't make mathematical sense. But there are things we can do.
I was just going to ask you, then what would Tom George do?
We need to first balance the budget. And again, the main expense, the thing that's out of control, is health care spending. We need to rein that in. That's number one. The second thing is we need major structural reforms in government itself. We need things like a part-time legislature, better budgeting rules. We need to ask whether we can still afford all the layers of government we have in Michigan, 1,500 villages and townships, 550 school districts. And my opponents agree with many of those reforms, but here's the difference. Many of those things cannot be effectuated by a new governor because they require constitutional change.
So you're for a constitutional convention?
And that will be on the ballot this fall. The people will be asked whether or not to approve that. This is a golden opportunity. The writers of Michigan's Constitution, and we're on our fourth, the one that we have now was approved in the 60s. They put in a provision that said every 16 years it will come up for review. This is the 16th year. We need to take advantage of it. And we can make government more efficient by changing its design in that way.
All right, we need to get a commercial break in here. As soon as we come back, we'll talk about some of the other things you've done since you've been in the legislature and what you would do if elected as Michigan's next governor. We'll be right back with State Senator Tom George. Stay with us. State Senator Tom George, Republican from Kalamazoo, our guest today on Spotlight. Senator, the Michigan business tax, been talked about an awful lot. Are you for reduction in that?
Sure. That would be a great goal. The problem is you can't immediately repeal it, as my opponents are calling for, because then you can't balance the budget.
And where are you going to make that money up?
You got to make the cuts.
The second you get rid of it,
yep,
you got a big chunk there that you got to make up. How are you going to make it up?
Well, here's the risk. If you just repeal it, the state could become insolvent. Look at what happened to GM, Chrysler, Greece, California. We can't have Michigan issuing IOUs. Debt, insolvency are very important, and we need to make sure the state can meet its obligations. So you can't just eliminate the Michigan business tax, because then it would make us insolvent. But here's what you could do. If you can constrain health spending, if you can constrain the spending within government, probably the more reasonable thing is to eliminate the surcharge on the MBT. We have a 22% surcharge. It amounts to about $350 million that was added on in 2007. And if we could get rid of that, we would be more competitive. But simply eliminating the MBT is just unrealistic, because it would make government insolvent. We can't have the check to Oakland University bounce next quarter. The state needs to be able to pay its bills.
One of the plans out here, and Business Leaders for Michigan has sort of endorsed it, is making sure that on services that we extend that tax more, to more services than what we're currently doing. For that?
I have voted against the service tax plan. In 2007, we briefly had a service tax. I voted against it. The current proposal in front of us is a tax increase. And I'm very concerned about increasing taxes. It would be a burden on the smaller number of people that are working. Chuck, we have about 10 million people in Michigan. 5 million used to work. Now only about 4 million are working. We can't justify putting a new tax burden on that smaller group of working people. So I've not seen a service tax proposal that I would support.
Let's talk about some other things that you've done since you've been in the legislature. You have opposed embryonic stem cell research. You've also opposed to abortion, correct?
I'm pro-life, and of course, the embryonic stem cell research measure has been decided by the voters. And the legislature has no need to revisit that.
That's
an
what I was going
issue
to ask you. You wouldn't go
that's
back
in the
and fool
past.
around with it anyway.
Well, there's a need for some transparency and reporting from our universities that are doing this work, but the voters have made a decision, and that is not related to fixing Michigan's economy. The issue of the day is how do we turn our economy around.
Polls are showing that you're running in last place among your Republican candidates. Why do you think you aren't faring better?
I'm not as well known as the other candidates. My message is better. They have crafted a message that is fiscally irresponsible. Massive tax cuts and more spending, that is what has given us $13 trillion of federal debt. It's the secret formula for political victory, and all my opponents are using it. I'm simply not as well known, Chuck, because I'm the only one who's a state legislator. I represent the Kalamazoo area, and I have a job. I've had to work for the last 10 years part-time when the legislature is not meeting. So for many people on the east side of the state, this is the first time they've heard of me or heard from me. But I'm a good candidate. Because I'm in the legislature, I know what we need to do. Because I'm on appropriations, I know how to balance a budget. And because I'm a practicing physician, I know how we can constrain our runaway health spending.
Are you going to be able to make up that difference in this short bit of time left before primary election day, which is less than a month now?
It's coming up fast, and it is a big hill to climb, but I can do it. And people are beginning to pay attention. This is an opportunity for them to learn about the candidates. They can learn about me at my website, georgeforgovernor.com. I'm a good candidate, and I think when they understand the fiscal challenges that the state faces, they will agree we need somebody who's realistic about what can be done, not someone who is promising things that can't be met. That will just lead to more dissatisfaction and less trust in government.
All right, we got to get another commercial break in. We'll hurry right back and talk about partisanship and how you would unify the state of Michigan. We'll be right back. Senator, are you for or against term limits and making changes in the current system?
Chuck, I think
because both Democrats and Republicans have been critical of the current system.
I think we would be better served by a part-time legislature and longer term limits. So if I had a magic wand, I would lengthen term limits, but I think a part-time legislature would also be helpful. You'd have 43 states have a part-time legislature. You'd have more legislators who are working back in their districts. It would help restore faith in government. You could reduce legislative benefits and pay. The surrounding states in the Midwest that have part-time legislatures, they cost half as much as ours. So there's a great savings as well. So it's lengthening term limits and going part-time.
Any poll that we've taken recently, and we've asked about partisanship and the fighting among Democrats and Republicans in this state, the voters say that they're sick and tired of both parties and they want less partisanship. They want people to get along. They want someone who can unify this state and not play the political games. Can you do that, and how would you do that?
Well, I think having a legislative background is important. I serve in the state Senate now. I have a record of bipartisanship. I'm one of the few, I think I'm the only one on the Republican side who can say I've actually worked with Democrats on a day-to-day basis. I'll give you some examples. Smoke-free air legislation. I helped get that through the Senate. It was a bipartisan effort. At one point, it was a two-bill package, myself and Senator Ray Basham, who's a Democrat. It ended up being a one-bill measure, but I worked on that for 4 years, Chuck, with Democrats. Another one I'm working on right now is a package of bills to help the city of Detroit deal with tax-reverted and abandoned properties. That's bipartisan. I worked on legislation to cap the number of billboards we put up in Michigan. That was bipartisan. So alone among the Republican candidates, I have a record of bipartisan accomplishment. And you're right. In the end, Republicans and Democrats have to work together, and we can because we have common goals.
If, and I know this is something you don't like to think about, but if you don't win in the primary, would you be open to running on the ticket with one of your opponents as lieutenant governor of the state?
Anything could happen, but right now I'm running to win. And I have a good message, Chuck. Fiscal stability, reform state health care, and reform the structure of government through constitutional change. That is a winning campaign. That's what Michigan needs to do, and I'm running to be the next governor.
Tell us something about Senator Tom George that the average person doesn't know, but they should know, that may help them decide to vote for you instead of one of your opponents.
Well, I finish what I start. I started college in 1976, and I just got my undergraduate degree this spring from U of M. Even though I'm a medical doctor, I hadn't finished. I'd gotten into medical school after 3 years. I hadn't finished my undergraduate degree, and I was there when President Obama gave the commencement address. I was one of the students, and he said, "Students, get out there and be politically involved." And I raised my hand and said, okay.
Said, "I'm politically involved."
So I got my undergraduate degree. I graduated this spring in the class of 2010 with my daughter, Maria, who graduated from Michigan State. So I finish what I start. Education's important. I set a good example because I went back and finished my undergraduate credits while I was serving in the Senate, working as a doctor, and running for governor.
Senator Tom George, thank you for coming in. I know there are a lot more questions. We'll try to answer some of them the next time we get you in. We can't get to everything, but we appreciate you coming in, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
All right. And coming up, Vince Kountz will join us, and he'll update us on the Detroit Regional Census and where we stand with that very important count. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight. Joining me now is Vince Kountz. He's with the Detroit Regional Census, and we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm glad to be here.
Good. You doing well?
Doing well, doing well.
Bring us up to date, because the census campaign, this has been a marathon campaign.
Yep.
Everybody was emphasizing the fact that April 1st, fill out your questionnaire, get it in. That is come and gone.
That is gone.
Where are we at now in the process? Because I think a lot of people think, okay, it's over with, but it's not over with.
It's not over with. We, when we mailed the form out back in March, we wanted people to mail it back using April 1st as a reference date. In the state of Michigan, we got 75% of all the households in the state mail their form back in the mail,
right,
which was probably the 5th best in the country.
So that was good.
That was good. Mm-hmm. Now what happens is on May 1st, we actually hired people to go out to those other 25% of households that didn't mail their form back and actually start knocking on doors.
Those are the census takers.
Those are the census takers. So they're out there now knocking on doors trying to ask people, if they didn't mail their form back, how many people live in the household. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that people participate with any census taker that knocks on the door.
A lot of people have fear
mm-hmm.
of answering the questionnaires. They believe that this is information that's going to get out
right.
about them, that it's going to be used for other purposes.
Well, we tried to emphasize.
True, right?
Yeah, we tried to emphasize that the Census Bureau, any employee, is under what's called Title 13 of the U.S. Code. And we all take an oath of office that we cannot provide that information to anyone outside the Census Bureau.
Completely confidential.
Completely confidential. There's a fine of $250,000, a prison term, if you give that information out. So it's very important that people understand the confidentiality of the census, and we do not on the census ask for your Social Security number or your driver's license number.
And if people are asking that type of information, then you know that they aren't working
for the U.S. Census. They're not working for the U.S. Census
And you don't have to answer.
And you don't have to answer them.
Help people understand, why is it so important that they fill out that form? What does it represent?
Well, first of all, the Constitution mandates that it represent political representation. So your congressional districts are drawn based on the census count. So it's very important for political representation that people are counted. Secondarily, over $400 billion in federal funds are allocated each and every year based on those census numbers.
That's money that comes back to Michigan if the count is right.
If the count is right, that money goes back to the community. The state of Michigan.
So each person represents some dollars and cents for this region.
Yeah, the state of Michigan estimated that for each person missed in a census, it counts that community $1,200 a year every year for 10 years. So you can see if many people are missed, that community loses out on many dollars.
And the dollars go to what type of thing? I mean, here everything
well,
from...
it goes to schools, for planning purposes, for road construction, for a myriad of things in the communities.
Yeah. Vince, there are still going to be people, regardless of what kind of information that you're putting out there, they're just going to be reluctant to partake in this. What do you do with that individual? How do you get around that?
Well, what we try to do is we try to emphasize the confidentiality, and then we try to get trusted voices in the community to convince people.
Someone that they may trust more than a government, someone working for the government.
We try to use ministers, we try to use service-based people, we try to use social workers to convince people, if they're reluctant, to make sure that they are counted in the census.
All right. The census takers will be out there until, is it July 15th? I hear?
Well, that's the deadline, but we're finishing up now. So the census takers are out there in the communities with that group that you talked about, that hardest to count group, the people who are reluctant. So we're still visiting those households. So if any community leaders know of any people that's still reluctant about the census, please tell them to cooperate with that census taker when he knocks on the door.
All right, Vince Kountz, thanks so much. Any other information we need to get out?
Well, I just want to thank you, Chuck, for all of the work that you did with helping us promote the census and help Michigan become one of the top states in the country in people mailing the form back.
Well, it's important because if we don't get the money coming back here, then someone else in another region is getting our money.
We'll get Michigan's money. That's correct.
Right, so they'll benefit and we won't benefit.
That's correct.
All right, Vince Kountz,
thanks
so much
Chuck.
for coming
Appreciate
in, and good luck with everything, and we'll try to continue to get the word out there about how important this is, because it only comes once every 10 years.
And then I'll come back once the data comes out and we'll talk about the results.
All right, that's
okay.
Good.
All right.
All right. And we want to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more Newsmakers in the Spotlight. We hope you have a good week.
This Week is next on 7.